Every open-world game released in the last 7 years owes a debt to Zelda. Every puzzle-driven adventure, every game that hands players a toolkit and says, figure it out, every title that trusts exploration over handholding, they're all standing on foundations Zelda built. But here's the question nobody's asking. When gaming media celebrates Zelda's anniversaries with nostalgia compilations and retrospectives, are they actually recognizing the series' true impact? Or are they missing the forest for the trees? Because Zelda's legacy isn't about nostalgia. It's not about green tunics or catchy jingles or childhood memories. Zelda's legacy is architectural. It's in the DNA of modern game design, hidden in plain sight, shaping how developers think about player agency, environmental storytelling, and emergent gameplay. And most players never realize they're experiencing Zelda's influence even when they're nowhere near Hyrule. Let's start at the beginning, because understanding Zelda's impact requires understanding just how revolutionary the original game was. When The Legend of Zelda launched in Japan on February 21st, 1986, it did something nearly unthinkable for its era. It dropped players into a world and said, go. No tutorial, no linear path, no obvious first step. The opening screen showed Link standing on a single screen of terrain, with exits in 3 directions. The game didn't tell players which way to go, it simply waited for them to choose. This approach flew in the face of gaming conventions at the time. Most NES games were strictly linear affairs. Players moved from left to right through Stage 1, then Stage 2, then Stage 3. The concept of exploration existed in some form, but nothing approached the freedom Zelda offered. Players could tackle the first 3 dungeons in any order. They could hunt for secrets in the overworld before ever entering a dungeon. They could get hopelessly lost, then slowly learn the world's geography through trial and error. Director Shigeru Miyamoto has stated in interviews that this design philosophy emerged from his childhood experiences exploring the countryside around Kyoto, discovering caves and forests without adult supervision. He wanted to capture that sense of wonder and discovery in digital form. The result was a game that trusted players to be curious, to experiment, to learn through exploration rather than instruction. This design philosophy, radical in 1986, became the blueprint for an entire category of games. The modern open-world genre, which generates billions in revenue annually and dominates gaming discourse, traces its lineage directly back to that first Zelda title. Before Red Dead Redemption let players explore the American frontier, before The Witcher 3 presented its massive fantasy world, before Elden Ring trusted players to find their own path through the lands between, Zelda established the fundamental principles: give players a world, give them tools, step back, and let them discover. But Zelda's influence extends far beyond simply creating large spaces to explore. The series pioneered specific design philosophies that have become industry standards, often without proper attribution. Consider how Zelda approaches dungeons, not as simple obstacle courses, but as elaborate 3-dimensional puzzles where the environment itself is the challenge. A Link to the Past, released for the Super Nintendo in 1991 in Japan and 1992 in North America, perfected this approach. Each dungeon functioned as a self-contained puzzle box where players needed to understand the space itself. The game introduced the concept of multiple floors with interconnected pathways, where actions on one floor affected another. Players learned to think vertically and temporally, mapping spaces in their minds and understanding how different rooms related to each other. This dungeon as puzzle philosophy directly influenced countless games across multiple genres. The Metroid Prime series, which launched in 2002, built its entire structure around this concept, treating each area as an interconnected puzzle space where observation and environmental awareness were as important as combat skills. Dark Souls, which debuted in 2011, took Zelda's approach to interconnected level design and applied it to its entire world, creating shortcuts and passages that rewarded players for understanding spatial relationships. The influence appears in less obvious places too. Environmental puzzle games like The Witness, released in 2016, echo Zelda's philosophy that spaces should teach players through design rather than dialogue. Even first-person games like Portal, launched in 2007, owe a conceptual debt to Zelda's approach of treating 3-dimensional spaces as puzzles to be understood and manipulated.
What makes Zelda's dungeon design so influential is its refusal to separate puzzle solving from exploration and combat. These aren't distinct activities, they're integrated aspects of a unified experience. A room might contain enemies that must be defeated in a specific order to open a door. A puzzle might require observing environmental details during a boss fight. Exploration reveals hints that make puzzles solvable. This holistic approach to level design influenced how developers think about creating spaces that feel cohesive and purposeful. Zelda's impact on item-based gameplay deserves particular attention because this system fundamentally changed how games approach player progression and problem-solving. In most games of the NES and SNES era, power-ups simply made characters stronger. Players collected them and became incrementally more capable through numerical stat increases. Zelda took a completely different approach. Items in Zelda games aren't just power-ups, they're tools that fundamentally change how players interact with the world. When Link obtains the hookshot in Ocarina of Time, released in 1998, the player doesn't just get a new weapon, they gain the ability to traverse environments differently, to reach previously inaccessible areas, to approach combat encounters with new strategies. The hookshot transforms how players think about their surroundings. Suddenly, certain surfaces become potential grappling points. Distances that seemed impossible to cross become traversable, and enemies with specific vulnerabilities become exploitable. This tool-based approach to progression created a template that countless games would follow. The hookshot itself became so iconic that it directly inspired similar mechanics in games across genres. Batman Arkham Asylum's Batclaw, which launched in 2009, functions almost identically. Spider-Man games have used web-swinging mechanics that echo the hookshot's combination of traversal and combat utility. Even non-action games borrowed the concept. Puzzle platformers regularly feature grappling hooks that serve the exact same mechanical purpose. But the influence extends beyond specific items to the underlying philosophy. Give players tools with multiple applications and let them discover creative solutions. Bombs in Zelda games can destroy walls, defeat enemies, solve puzzles, and even serve as makeshift platforms. The boomerang stuns enemies, retrieves distant items, and activates switches. Each tool has obvious applications and hidden depths that reward experimentation. This design philosophy reached its apex in Breath of the Wild, which launched in March 2017 as both a Wii U and Nintendo Switch title. The game's physics-based systems allowed for emergent solutions that even the developers hadn't fully anticipated. Players discovered they could use metal objects to conduct electricity, create updrafts with fire to reach new heights, or freeze objects in time to build makeshift bridges. The game became famous for videos showing players solving puzzles in wildly creative ways, and the developers deliberately built systems flexible enough to allow this creativity. The impact of this approach reverberates through modern gaming. Death Stranding, released in 2019, built its entire gameplay loop around tool-based problem-solving, where players must figure out how to traverse challenging terrain using a diverse toolkit. The Dishonored series, which debuted in 2012, gives players numerous abilities and actively encourages finding creative solutions to objectives. Tears of the Kingdom, released in May 2023, doubled down on this philosophy with its Fuse and Ultra Hand abilities, creating emergent gameplay possibilities that generated thousands of player-created solutions across social media. What Zelda demonstrated, and what these games inherited, is that player-driven problem-solving creates more memorable and satisfying experiences than developer-prescribed solutions. When players feel clever for discovering an approach the game didn't explicitly teach, they're experiencing exactly what Miyamoto envisioned with that first Zelda title, the joy of discovery. Zelda's contributions to atmospheric design and environmental storytelling represent another often overlooked aspect of its legacy. While modern games receive praise for show-don't-tell storytelling, Zelda was implementing this philosophy decades earlier, using environment and atmosphere to convey narrative without relying on dialogue or cutscenes. Consider Ocarina of Time's Shadow Temple, one of the most atmospherically dense locations in gaming history. The temple tells a story entirely through its environment. Torture devices, bloodstains, and disturbing imagery communicate Hyrule's dark history without a single text box explaining what happened. The dead hand enemy, with its grotesque design and disturbing attack pattern, creates an atmosphere of dread that words couldn't match. Players who explore this temple leave understanding something terrible occurred here, even if the specifics remain ambiguous.
This approach to environmental storytelling influenced how developers think about world building. The Souls series, beginning with Demon Souls in 2009, became famous for cryptic environmental storytelling where players piece together narrative through item descriptions and visual design. But this technique has clear precedence in how Zelda games use environments to convey information and mood. Wind Waker, released in 2003 for GameCube, demonstrated environmental storytelling on a macro scale. The Great Sea itself tells a story. The player gradually realizes they're sailing over a drowned Hyrule, with mountaintops becoming islands and ancient structures visible beneath the waves. The game never explicitly states this early on. Players discover it through exploration and observation. This revelation transforms how players view the entire game world, recontextualizing everything they've experienced. Majora's Mask, which launched in 2000, used its 3-day cycle and environmental changes to create atmosphere unlike anything gaming had seen. Watching Clocktown's inhabitants go through their routines, seeing their fear build as the moon descends, understanding their personal struggles through optional observations, this level of atmospheric storytelling influenced countless games. Outer Wilds, released in 2019, uses a similar time loop structure with careful environmental observation as its core mechanic, directly echoing Majora's Mask's innovations. Zelda's sound design deserves special recognition for its psychological impact on player experience. The series created audio cues that became embedded in gaming consciousness, training players to associate specific sounds with specific outcomes. The distinctive chime when players discover a secret chest, the triumphant fanfare when solving a puzzle, the warning beep when health runs critically low. These sounds trigger immediate emotional and psychological responses in players. What makes this significant is how Zelda used sound to create feedback loops that reinforced exploration and problem solving. That secret discovery chime doesn't just indicate success, it delivers a hit of dopamine that encourages players to keep searching for secrets. The puzzle solution melody creates satisfaction that makes players want to solve more puzzles. This audio-psychological connection influenced how games across all genres approach feedback design. Modern games regularly employ similar audio cues to reinforce player behaviors. The satisfying ding in many RPGs when leveling up, the musical stings when completing objectives in open-world games, the audio flourishes accompanying achievements. These all trace back to design principles Zelda established. Game audio designer Koji Kondo created a vocabulary of musical cues that became industry standard, though his contributions often go unrecognized outside specialist discussions. Zelda's approach to character progression represents another paradigm shift that influenced game design broadly. While RPGs traditionally focused on numerical stat increases, higher attack power, more defense points, increased magic points, Zelda emphasized ability acquisition and player skill development. When Link gains new items in Zelda games, players don't just get stronger in statistical terms, they become more capable through expanded options and improved understanding. A player who has mastered the timing for perfect parries in Breath of the Wild is functionally more powerful than a player with higher stats who hasn't developed that skill. The game rewards learning enemy patterns, understanding environmental systems, and developing mechanical proficiency. This philosophy influenced how action games approach progression. Devil May Cry, God of War, Bayonetta, and countless other action titles emphasize mechanical skill and combo mastery over pure statistical advancement. Players improve not just because their characters' numbers increase, but because they develop as players, learning timing, pattern recognition, and optimal strategies. This influence extends to unexpected genres. Roguelike games like Hades, released in 2020, balance statistical progression with player skill development.
Players succeed not just because they've unlocked powerful upgrades, but because they've learned enemy patterns and developed mechanical proficiency. This dual progression system, character advancement combined with player improvement, echoes Zelda's approach to making players feel genuinely more capable, rather than simply numerically stronger. Breath of the Wild took this philosophy further by making environmental awareness and system mastery more important than equipment quality. Players who understood how fire spreads, how electricity conducts, and how the physics system worked could overcome challenges that would stump players with better gear but less system knowledge. This approach influenced numerous open-world and survival games released subsequently, where player knowledge and creativity often matter more than statistical advantages.
The true measure of Zelda's legacy isn't found in sales figures or critical acclaim, though the series certainly has both. As of 2023, the franchise has sold over 150 million copies across all titles, making it one of Nintendo's most successful properties. Breath of the Wild alone sold over 31 million copies, while Tears of the Kingdom moved 20 million units in its first year. Critical reception has been consistently exceptional, with multiple Zelda titles appearing on greatest games of all time lists. But these numbers, impressive as they are, don't capture the full scope of Zelda's impact. The series' true legacy lies in how it fundamentally changed the language of game design. When developers discuss emergent gameplay, they're referencing principles Zelda pioneered. When games feature Metroidvania progression, though named for Metroid and Castlevania, they're using dungeon-as-puzzle design that Zelda perfected. When open-world titles emphasize exploration and discovery over quest markers and waypoints, they're following paths Zelda charted. Consider Elden Ring, released in February 2022 to massive critical and commercial success. Director Hidetaka Miyazaki explicitly cited Breath of the Wild as a major influence on the game's open-world design. Elden Ring gives players freedom to explore and tackle challenges in various orders, trusts them to discover secrets without constant guidance, and rewards curiosity with meaningful discoveries. These design principles come directly from Zelda's playbook. Genshin Impact, which launched in 2020 and became a massive global success, borrows heavily from Breath of the Wild's climbing mechanics, elemental interaction systems, and approach to world exploration. The game doesn't hide this influence. It's immediately apparent to anyone familiar with Breath of the Wild. What's significant is how a free-to-play mobile game reaching audiences who might never have played Zelda still spreads Zelda's design philosophy to millions of players. Indie developers regularly cite Zelda as inspiration for their projects. Tunic, released in 2022, deliberately evokes classic Zelda while adding modern twists. Hyper Light Drifter, launched in 2016, takes clear inspiration from A Link to the Past's combat and exploration. Death's Door, released in 2021, features Zelda-style dungeons and item progression. These games prove that Zelda's influence transcends AAA development, inspiring creators at all scales. The influence appears in unexpected places too. Minecraft, which has sold over 300 million copies and become a cultural phenomenon, owes a conceptual debt to Zelda's approach to tool-based problem-solving and emergent gameplay. Players use diverse tools to interact with and modify their environment, discovering creative solutions to self-imposed challenges. While Minecraft's specific mechanics differ vastly from Zelda, the underlying philosophy, give players tools and let them experiment, comes from the same design tradition. Horizon Zero Dawn and its sequel, Forbidden West, feature elaborate puzzle-filled ruins that echo Zelda's dungeon design. Ghost of Tsushima includes environmental exploration and discovery mechanics, clearly influenced by Zelda's approach to rewarding curiosity. Even games in completely different genres show Zelda's fingerprints when examined closely. What makes this influence particularly noteworthy is how often it goes unacknowledged in mainstream gaming discourse. When media outlets discuss the evolution of open-world games, they often point to Grand Theft Auto 3 from 2001 as the genre's originator, ignoring that Zelda established core open-world principles 15 years earlier.
When articles celebrate Souls games for environmental storytelling, they rarely mention that Zelda games used the same techniques in the late 1990s. This historical amnesia does a disservice to understanding how game design actually evolves. Innovation rarely appears from nowhere, it builds on foundations laid by earlier works. Recognizing Zelda's contributions doesn't diminish the achievements of later games. Instead, it illuminates the continuity of design philosophy across decades, showing how great ideas propagate and evolve through the industry. The conversation around Zelda's legacy often focuses on nostalgia, memories of first playing Ocarina of Time, the excitement of exploring Wind Waker's Great Sea, the sense of wonder discovering Breath of the Wild's Hyrule. These emotional connections are valid and meaningful, but they can obscure the more significant legacy. Zelda didn't just create beloved games, it created a design language that the entire industry speaks. When contemporary games receive praise for trusting players to explore and discover, they're being celebrated for implementing principles Zelda established. When reviewers commend emergent gameplay and creative problem-solving, they're recognizing design philosophies Zelda pioneered. When players express appreciation for games that respect their intelligence and reward curiosity, they're responding to approaches Zelda normalized.
This matters because understanding influence helps both developers and players appreciate the craft of game design. Recognizing that Breath of the Wild's revolutionary open-world design has roots in the original 1986 Legend of Zelda illuminates how the series has consistently pushed boundaries across nearly 4 decades. Seeing how A Link to the Past's dungeon design influenced modern level design highlights the enduring value of thoughtful spatial puzzle construction. For developers, understanding Zelda's legacy provides a masterclass in design principles that have proven effective across multiple console generations and technological paradigms. The core ideas, trust players, reward exploration, integrate mechanics into unified experiences, use environment to tell stories, remain relevant regardless of hardware capabilities or graphical fidelity. For players, recognizing Zelda's influence enhances appreciation of the games they love. Understanding that a beloved indie title uses design principles from A Link to the Past doesn't diminish that game's achievements, it reveals how great design ideas propagate and evolve, creating a rich ecosystem of interactive experiences built on proven foundations. The Legend of Zelda's true legacy isn't found in anniversary celebrations or nostalgic-driven retrospectives, though these have their place. The legacy lives in every open-world game that trusts players to find their own path, in every puzzle-driven adventure that rewards observation and experimentation, in every title that gives players tools and says, "Figure it out," in every game that uses environment and atmosphere to tell stories without relying on exposition. Zelda's innovations have become so fundamental to modern game design that they're often invisible, simply how games work, rather than revolutionary ideas that had to be pioneered. This invisibility is, paradoxically, the ultimate measure of success. When design principles become so widely adopted that they're taken for granted, they've transcended their origin point to become part of the medium's foundation. The series continues to innovate with each new release. Breath of the Wild revolutionized open-world design when many thought the formula had been perfected. Tears of the Kingdom pushed emergent gameplay to new heights, creating systems so flexible that players discovered solutions the developers never anticipated. Whatever comes next will likely introduce concepts that influence games for years to come, continuing a cycle of innovation that began in 1986. So, when the question arises about Zelda's true legacy, the answer isn't found in sales figures or critical scores or nostalgic memories. It's found in the fabric of modern game design itself. Every time a player climbs a mountain in an open-world game just to see what's there, they're experiencing Zelda's legacy. Every time a game trusts players to be curious and rewards that curiosity meaningfully, Zelda's influence is present. Every time developers design spaces as puzzles to be understood rather than just obstacles to overcome, they're working in a tradition Zelda established. The green tunic might be iconic, the Master Sword might be legendary, the music might be unforgettable,
But Zelda's true legacy is written in lines of code across thousands of games, embedded in design documents that never mention Hyrule, and experienced by millions of players who never realize they're seeing through a lens Zelda ground decades ago. That's not nostalgia, that's influence, that's legacy, and that's worth celebrating far more than any anniversary ever could.